an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Children of Divinity, Book 3, Ascend, Chapters 4, 5, and part of 6. I stopped partway to try and stay around 50 pages because otherwise it was going to be like 70. In this section, Dr. Lindon comes clean to everybody, mostly because Jordan puts him on the spot, and he kind of has to. And Jordan and Brian have another fight, and I am really not sure what is going to happen with them at this point, because this feels unfixable right now. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. Heather is here in the chat. So this section is really interesting. You know, I've been sort of fascinated by Brian's conundrum with his relationship with Jordan because as somebody who also does not have superpowers, or do I really can relate to the idea of not feeling adequate. And it's an interesting thing, like a sort of parallel to a lot of the recent relationships in my life. I have been the secondary breadwinner if I had a job at all. Like with Brendan, I did not have a job for a time. With Owen, I've had a job the whole time, but I wasn't making much money at first because it was unspoiled and I was getting things off the ground. And there's a certain power imbalance that comes from not really providing financially for your relationship and the home that you both occupy that can make you feel really self-conscious about your, like, whether or not they respect you, see you as an equal, are invested in you in a way that is enough to like look past the fact that you're not bringing money in. And, you know, with Brendan, it was a genuine problem. It was very clear as time went on, he really resented the fact that I didn't make as much money. And I resented that he made as much as he did for a job that he sort of fell backwards into by accident and was a dream job for him that, like I said, he was just working as like a stalker at Whole Foods, and somebody who sold beer for a company offered him this like bananas job that he never even had to apply for or go find. So we each had our thing. And I feel like that's like sort of the thing with Jordan is like, she was born with these abilities. She didn't do anything to necessarily earn them. That is not to say that she hasn't done a ton of training and done everything she needs to in order to maximize what she can do with these abilities. But she also kept it secret from him for quite a while. And when she finally did like tell him the truth about what was going on, she pretty much behaved as if she could just continue to live the life that she had been and continue to do the job, and it would be like Brian would have the same reactions to everything, or even I think that he would be more calm knowing that she had these extra abilities with which to defend herself. Like, I think she expected him to feel almost comforted by what she could do. And, you know, maybe that would have worked if she had revealed this to him before everything blew up and it was clear that there were a lot of other people out there with abilities. But because she sort of like, he found out because everybody was sort of outed at once. It feels in a lot of ways like, and it's not, you know, it wasn't actually like she didn't sit down and talk to him. She did. But there was a feeling of like her being up against the wall. And I feel that sort of undermines it and also makes him like realize how little he knows, which can then lead to wondering, well, is there somebody out there who has a lot like stronger abilities than you and who can do things that would specifically counter whatever it is that you are able to do, which is, he's right to wonder that, as we see, that is very much a thing. And this conversation that they have, he has a bit of a face-off with Jason before she gets home. And that's sort of how this section starts. Jason is talking to Ryan and Douglas about the setup that they've got going for their new, like, splinter group. We find out later, too, that this group has applied for, like, clearance with Interpol, and they are getting it, which I'm genuinely surprised that that's, like, a thing that is going to be allowed, considering that they're all sort of, like, traitors. You know, I don't really know how that works, but I would have expected that any sort of official governing body of any kind would not want anything to do with them, and they would not want to even approach, you know. I don't know if they're doing this with some sort of other credentials or aliases or what's going on, if they have like a front that they're pretending to be. But regardless, Jason is sort of frustrated in this section. It's interesting, we're in his POV. And I don't know if we've done that before. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but being in his POV is sort of surprising because even though he acknowledges that he and Jordan have really intense chemistry, there is no real sense of lust from him. And that, you know, she's not in the room with him as it's happening, but when we're in her head, anytime that he comes to mind, she has this moment of like, I can't think about him because that is dangerous. And he doesn't really seem to have the same, like, instinctive reaction to her. It's more that he's looking at Brian and like, man, I do not get it. Why is she into this dude? And he's immediately, well, I mean, the guy is rich, but she doesn't seem like the type to go for that. And then he kind of has to stop and be like, maybe she is, though. I guess I don't really know her that well, which I did appreciate. This is something that I always like, especially as a grown-up. Looking back at some of the romances that I was into, and there weren't many, I'll be honest. The amount of romance based on pure chemistry and that had nothing to do with who the other person actually was. It's 98% of romance out there, you know. Even in actual real life relationships, I feel like that kind of chemistry counts for people more a lot of the time than real connection because it is fucking strong. It's really easy from the outside to be like, that shouldn't be all that's important to you. And no, like, it shouldn't. Ideally, it should not. But when you are in the midst of that kind of like chemical reaction to somebody, there is a reason that it's like a trope, because our bodies are subject to the whims of our hormones and our, you know, adrenal reactions to shit. That is a very real thing that we're experiencing. So yeah, he's just got a sort of distance from it. And even his thinking about Brian, it isn't, there's no kind of disdain or contempt, you know? Even when he's thinking, I don't get it, what she sees in this guy, it's not followed up by, he's such a fucking wimp, or he seems really pitiful. It's just more like, they are not compatible with each other. I just don't understand the math here. You know, it feels very restrained in a way that I can't decide if that makes me like him more or not. You know, I have had a history of going for guys who are sort of like rigidly rational in a way that I think is indicative of their having like discipline or control, and it turns out that sometimes that's just a lack of passion that winds up being a bummer later. So I'm just sort of like holding off on judgment with that, but it did seem like very coldly assessing without there being an indicator of how strong his attraction to her is really. Saying they have intense chemistry is a very dispassionate way to say it, you know? Heather says, we have not had his POV before. He's just got his emotions on lock. Jason is uber professional and he does respect Brian. He's just not very effusive. Yeah, I guess that's my thing. Like, do I like that or not? Like I said, I have a history of like mistaking that for being indicative of a kind of maturity, and it's not necessarily. But, Heather says there's a short story from his perspective later you might enjoy. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So what is going on here is that Ryan is setting everything up from scratch. And I really appreciated that at one point she's like, I'm feeling pretty fucking unappreciated right now, Jason. Because he's just like, we don't have time for any of this. We have shit happening out there. We need to get out there. We need to track this dude down. And you're telling me it's going to be like a month before we've got our shit together enough to begin to mobilize it all. And I just cannot be waiting a fucking month. And dude, I get that you feel an urgency about this, but like, what did you think it was going to be like breaking off into your own little sect? Because I fully expected you guys to not even have some of the equipment that Ryan is working on right now. The fact that they're going to be able to have access to some of the stuff they're getting is purely 100% because of her abilities, and that just doesn't seem to be occurring to him. He's taking it very much for granted. And I just was glad that she not only is like, hey, I'm doing state-of-the-art shit here, by the way, but also when he starts pointing out all of these different things that Aftermath has been doing and that they have to keep track of him, at one point she goes over that same map and points to all of these things that she has already investigated and has already ruled out that Aftermath was involved based on a bunch of different data that she has gone through, and, you know, the cameras in the area for days before and days after. Like, he is behaving as if Ryan working on setting this up means that they are completely neglecting surveillance and security of any kind, and that's not what's happening. And I just like the fact that she is like, dude, listen, I would appreciate it if you would actually talk to me about your concerns here instead of like coming at me and yelling about how all of this stuff is really critical and I'm not thinking about that. Because if you had just conversed, we would have been able to avoid this moment where I kind of show you up a little bit. Not that he seems to care, which I appreciate, but... And yeah, they all leave, and he's in the midst of sending a note to Jordan just being like, yo, dude, it would be cool if you could come back. We don't know where you are. And as he's in the midst of doing this, and it's like an encrypted message, Brian walks in and is like, I really would appreciate being able to send a note myself. Because Jason offers to like include something from Brian in the message he's sending. And Jason says, look, I understand you wanting to do that, but in case any of this stuff gets intercepted, we have to make sure that these messages are as flat and emotionless as possible and don't give anything away indicating who has written them and what's going on. So you aren't going to be able to write like, hey, babe, I miss you so much and I'm so worried about you. I love you. Like, that's not how this is going to be handled. And Jason is describing him as just looking like he is losing his mind. What kept running through my head here was, and forgive me, Heather, I am by no means comparing Stephenie Meyer to your husband, but when I covered Twilight with Miles, there's this whole section that's from Jacob's POV, and he's describing as when Bella is pregnant, the state of Edward looking like the man on fire. That's what he keeps calling him, like the man on fire face was back, etc., because he is desperately worried about her and frantic, and there's really not anything that he can do. And he isn't used to being in the position where there is nothing that he can do. And when you are somebody who is used to taking action or having control, and you suddenly find yourself in a place where you cannot do that, and there's multiple reasons why. You can't do that because you are outclassed in terms of like your power sometimes. You cannot do anything because your partner has explicitly told you not to interfere, and in order to respect them at all, you have to listen. There's all kinds of reasons why this could happen, but I kept thinking about that man on fire thing. And he basically goes back and forth with Jason here about the concern that he's having, but like in sort of an accusatory way. I'm going to read part of this here because he is less aggressive than I would have thought. But Jason, I have to admit, missteps here. Because he tells Brian, I know what you're going through. I just personally feel that there is no worse way to handle somebody who is under intense strain than assuring them you know how they feel, unless you have literally experienced virtually the exact same situation. I just don't think there's like, and this is different than engaging in a conversation with somebody who is reaching out and you're trying to relate to them and be like, well, I had something that was like sort of similar where I went through XYZ and this is what I was feeling. That's not what's happening here. It's a much more like immediate, crucial interaction. It's not bonding between friends. It's guys who are so, like rivals, and they're aware that they're rivals. And him saying, I know what you're going through, immediately I was like, you better be following this up with, my wife was someone in the field and died or something like that, because otherwise, sir, that was a bad move. And we find out there isn't really anything to follow that up with other than, I've been in relationships and they haven't worked out, which is not really at all the same thing, sir. So, because he's talking about like women who were in the business and women who weren't, and how there's like a strain between them. And yeah, but you have abilities. You know, it's just a really different situation when you are somebody who can handle yourself and is considered a threat to people out there versus somebody like Brian. You know, his threats are on paper. Brian is an office man. He is not a physical man. So, unsurprisingly, Brian gets pretty irritated with this. I haven't been married, but I've dated women in the profession and out of the profession before. She's my wife, and I'm supposed to protect her. You can't this time. Accept it, because being mad about it isn't going to change shit. Again, not the vibe. Like, he is just annoyed with Brian in general, and while he's managing to stay dispassionate in a lot of ways, I feel like it leaks out here in the way that he's handling Brian, because he's just irritated at this point, you know? And he says, do you know what it feels like to feel this helpless? No, I can't say I do. She's the most capable woman I've met in this field, and I've worked with a few. And Brian says, this field? Do you mean espionage or playing superhero? And that was Brian's misstep, because Jason is just like, playing? People have died. And we have superpowers. What are you talking about? Why are you using that language? I'm really interested in knowing exactly why you're being belittling about it, because it feels like you don't take this shit seriously, but then you're out here really freaking out in a way that suggests you do take it seriously. So, which is it? Why are you going to cop an attitude like this? And what Brian comes back with is like, well, do you think I don't appreciate the dangers? And I'm like, well, that's exactly his point, dude. It feels like you're saying you don't, but then you're mad at that suggestion. Don't be a dick about it then. And at the end of this, he says, I would have preferred to have gone with her. Everyone needs someone to watch their back from time to time, but and I mean this, if I had to bet on her getting back to you, I'd put every dollar I had on it. You're right, Blackwell. She does need someone to watch her back. Someone who can keep up with her, Brian said, his voice intentionally trailing off, leaving something unsaid. Without a further word, he turned and walked out the door with a purpose in his step. And I really thought what we were going to get was Jordan coming back and straight up finding that he had already undergone the procedure already. I really did. I thought that this was the moment where he just decided, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to do this while she's gone, explicitly while she's gone, because I know that she's going to be mad at me for it, and I can't have her trying to talk me out of it. And I will not be surprised if that's how he decides to handle this after all. I will be perfectly honest. I think he should. Later on, when he has his fight with Jordan, she accuses him of having like a macho mentality. And I'm not going to say that's not part of it, because like, let's face it, you know, there are some things that it is really hard to break even when you know better, and we are programmed from birth to think a certain way. And I am not going to pretend that a certain feeling of like machismo, especially because he knows that there is a guy she's attracted to that he's sort of up against, that of course is a factor. But him talking about how we really need to be equals, the power dynamic in the relationship isn't fair, and that he feels like 80% of what happens because that's what Jordan wants, feels exactly correct to me from the outside. And we don't spend that much time with the two of them, and we don't spend a lot of time with, like, we haven't seen them not in crisis mode. You know, it's been mostly shit going wrong, and it feels understandable that she gets her way so much of the time because she has the powers and we're in a situation that requires those. So I don't even really hold it against her. However, the fact is that she does get her way because of her abilities and her fighting position. Like, what he is saying here is not untrue. And I do think that she can say as much as she wants that she respects him, that he doesn't have to be a fighter like this for her to think he's valuable, that he is fighting the good fight even though he doesn't seem to like really realize it. And that's all well and good. And I'm sure that to a point she even means it. But there is something that happens in a relationship after a long time when you're with somebody who isn't as capable as you are. And whether or not they need to be capable in this particular way, because of the crisis that we're in right now, this ability feels particularly crucial at the moment. And so saying like, well, you're in these boardrooms fighting for things, that doesn't feel helpful right now. We're about to have an all-out war. And, like, to a point, yeah, there has to be somebody, like, in these rooms advocating and arguing and with a position that can be, have a particular insight because of their closeness to all of the people who have these abilities. But I really understand him feeling like right now that's not that helpful. And as things go on and the situation continues to sort of devolve, I can't help but think Jordan would reach a point where she starts to be a little contemptuous of him. And I don't think she would even realize it was happening or be able to control it. And I say this as somebody who discovered, like, this for myself. I found myself in a relationship where when I stepped back, I realized that I had next to no respect for this person anymore. And it was just a series of things over the years and me feeling like I had to be the one to step in and handle everything. And they were like, not only were they not able to do it, because there were times when they weren't interested in doing it, you know? And I'm not saying that's Brian's problem. I'm saying that if there are repeated incidents that start to stack up where he can't do anything, she is going to begin to feel the responsibility being solely on her in that way. And there is a resentment that begins to build that cannot be helped other than in like therapy sessions. And I really would challenge them to find a therapist who knows how to deal with like an awakened being married to a regular normie vanilla person. So I feel that if he doesn't go ahead with this, things are going to be really bad for them. And if he does do it, it's going to be a problem because she is so worried about Eldon Spears and his connection. And she says to herself later that she should have told Brian, and she really should have. She tells him that there's no connection right now. And he's like, well, unless you find the proof, I'm fucking doing it. I really was like, because she thinks this isn't the time to do it. And I'm like, this man is showing all the signs of being ready to walk out the door and do this shit anyway. This is absolutely the time. I know it's late. I know that you're tired. I know that this is like an emotionally, you know, what's the word I want? Volatile moment. But that's like all the more reason to bring him back down to earth or have him come to this meeting with everybody. You know, it was just I just feel for him on this. And I think that her reaction is unfair. Her just accusing it of being like a macho bullshit thing. And the whole, like, she sort of at the end, when things really begin to fly off the handle, she says something like, I need my husband to hold me and tell me that everything is going to be okay. I'm trying to find the spot. Okay, here it is. We've talked about this so many times. It takes more than power to do this. It takes training and will. Dedication and sacrifice are a staple. Sacrifice? Are you fucking kidding me, Jordan? I've spent the better part of our relationship worrying about you, not seeing you every day, celebrating birthdays over the phone, maybe. I have sacrificed. I need this. I don't need you to be awakened, Brian. No, Jordan, but I do. This is a marriage. And this is when he talks about her, like, everything being mostly what she wants. Brian, I'm trying to save people here. Save thousands, maybe millions. Save the next Lily. We've danced this bloody dance a dozen times. You not having powers, that's about you, not me, not us. Which I'm like, but he did say that, though. He did say, I do. And we're not, like, our power balance isn't equal. So it's weird, like, when she says it's not about us, I'm like, well, it is about him, which makes it about you as a couple. Put your goddamn male ego aside for a moment and just look at the stakes. This is bigger than us. I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this from you right now. I need your support. I need my husband to hold me and tell me everything is going to be all right. And then he gets up and holds her and he tells her everything is going to be all right. And honestly, for me, this was like just evidence of what he's saying. She throws a fit and he's apologizing to her about how this is just really hard to handle. And then she is demanding emotional labor from him for her own sake because she feels stressed. Which that is her getting her way again. That's her flipping the conversation in the moment and making it about how unfair he's being to her when the other sentence out of her mouth is how this isn't about us or about me. Well, if it's not, and it's about him, then the fact that he's even asking you or having this conversation with you is respectful. And I want her to be a little bit more like receptive of his concerns, yes, but also like be aware that he doesn't need your permission to do this, you know? And that is part of why her not giving him all the information about what she knows about Spears and about herself. Again, she goes and does this like whole meeting, and her entire team is going to be given information that she refused to give him in a one-on-one conversation. That's a bad look, Jordan. That's not good. You have already, there have been moments of you springing shit on him in the midst of a fucking like group meeting. And he has expressed to you how troubling it is to be getting information at the same time as your friends when he's supposed to be your partner. It should not be arranged this way. You should talk to him about it before everybody else so that he is by your side in the capacity of support in the moment. But you aren't involving him, and then you're still expecting the kind of support that you would get if you were involving him. And that's extraordinarily selfish and unfair. And it's just a real moment for me of like how deeply she does not stop and think about him at all. When she thinks about him, it's always about feeling guilty. And this guilt is this very nebulous thing, but it's not actually, well, I did X, Y, Z, and I guess if I were in his shoes, I would feel. There is very, very little of that. And if she stopped to think about how he's going to feel when he hears about this later, and everyone else is already aware, and there's a whole fucking attack team set up, and they have figured out their like strategies and everything. I mean, what if they bust into this place and he's in the midst of his fucking awakening procedure? You know, I would not be surprised if that were to happen, because he gets up and leaves the next morning, and he could just be going to fucking wherever, you know? And this just, yeah. By 8, Brian had kissed her goodbye and left for his office. Did he, though? Jordan? I'm just saying. I'm like, if he does go through with this, I am super intrigued about how she's going to feel about it. Because her constantly saying that she doesn't need him to be awakened is, again, her like putting her own needs ahead of his and not listening to the concerns he's having. And I really want to know what his power would be like. Because so far as we have seen, there is no real link between the personalities of people and what kind of powers they have. And that may be something that we begin to sort of piece together later. But as of right now, it seems sort of arbitrary. You know, it's not really, because there are properties in which people have powers and they are linked to their like interests, or their personality just veers into this sort of like attitude, and that attitude is expressed in a certain way, and their power mimics that. Like somebody who's really angry and their power manifests as fire, as like one of the most basic examples. But I can't help but wonder if she will wind up having more respect for him if he just does what he wants. Because this is something that I think a lot of us with really strong personalities don't want to admit to ourselves, is we are looking for someone who can stand up to us. And I say this as somebody like who can be kind of controlling. I will not lie. And I really am aware that I'm like that. And I try to be really balanced about how I approach things, because I have been, as so many of us have seen, we continue to perpetuate the attitudes of our parents. And I lived under an extremely controlling father. So I know what it's like for somebody to be super controlling and to feel like your every move is like watched and judged. It sucks. But I can be that way a little bit. And I have to figure out how to like cope with that and manage that and be honest about it while also empathetic. And the times that I have respected Owen the most are when he has stood up to me about things and sort of been like, you know what? You saying that feels really manipulative. I don't like that. And you need to stop. Things like he has said things like that to me that make me stop and go, one, he is right. I wasn't even like trying to be manipulative. It's just that's part of my personality sometimes, and I'm not aware, and he's calling me out and making me stop and look at it, and he is right. And two, he just put his foot down and was just like, I want you to know that I see what you're doing. I'm not an idiot. Stop. And I'll tell you what, there is nothing like a turn on, like of somebody just being like, no, we're not going to do that. And you know that it's based in something that's very real and legitimate, not just them being an asshole, you know? I think Brian going for this might be the right thing to do. I'm just saying. I'm sort of rooting for him on this. So I've spent a lot of time talking about that, but that's like a major section of these. And for me, that's like some of the most interesting stuff is just like the psychological aspect of being with somebody who has these abilities and like surrounded by this intrigue. And that is like, as the person who doesn't have powers, I'm naturally just sort of drawn to his position and wondering how I would cope with it as well. So before she goes to talk to him, she has a meeting with all of her sisters. And this is the first time that we get to see all of them. Which is, I have to say the fact that she like had this meeting with them before going to see him. He's asleep. So, you know, it makes sense. But there was a part of me that was like, after having seen him freaking out with Jason, I was sort of like, I wish to God you would just go to him first and just be like, I'm safe, I'm home, I have to have this talk with my sisters. But if she did that, then she'd be showing her hand that there's something major happening and that she's not telling him. And evidently she just likes keeping secrets from him so much. So she has this meeting with her sisters. And like I said, we hadn't met any, we've heard about them, but we haven't actually met them. So we've got Deirdre, Marissa, and is it Alyssa? There was an A. I can't remember her name. Alessa. Alessa is the lawyer, right? And Deirdre is the cop, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just going through this to make sure. Marissa is the cop. Okay, got you. Marissa's the cop. Alessa is the lawyer. And Deirdre is a social worker, right? Is that what it was? Something like that. And it's kind of fun. Alessa is like sort of the model of their mom, and she's sitting perfectly coiffed with her excellent posture and talking about how don't lose that amazing man you've got. You have to give our mother grandchildren. And I was just like, girl, you need to take several steps back. And Jordan tells them that they're all aliens, and basically the reaction is, yeah, that sounds right. And it's not to say that they're not shocked, because they're definitely like not thinking in that direction, it's clear. But once it's outlined for them, it's more of like okay, that fills in a whole lot of blanks. All right. And they're very mad at their dad for keeping it from us. They're saying, you know, essentially, I'm getting dressed right now and going the fuck over there because we need to talk about this. And Jordan's like, yeah, they're expecting you. Jill is the one that has the most optimistic reaction, which is not surprising. Jill is basically like, wait, we're aliens? That's rad. Wait, we can live for thousands of years? Oh my God. Are you serious? We just get to like look young for thousands of years. This is amazing. And honestly, I can't help but just be like completely Team Jill on this. I understand the feelings of betrayal because your father knew and didn't tell you, and you've been struggling with hiding powers and feeling like a freak. I totally understand that anger, but I personally, as somebody who is beginning to age and really realizing what I am leaving behind me, that the point of youth is that you don't know that it's not like this mostly. The majority of your life you do not spend like that. But you never get that as a youth. That's how it works. If somebody were to tell me that I could stay like this, even this, I would prefer to be Jill at like 19 and find this out. Don't get me wrong. But if somebody were to tell me you're going to be looking like you're 37, even when you're 90, it would be really hard for me to not just whoop and cheer about that. And this is not even like my ideal spot, but I know it's only going to get worse from here. So I'll take it. And everybody is sort of like mystified at Jill's reaction, but honestly, I can't. I like, even when they're saying like, well, we're going to watch all of our friends die. And Jordan has a moment of realizing that she's going to outlive Brian and how sad that is. And like thinking about what if somebody told me I was going to outlive Owen by thousands of years, literally, it would be a real shock, of course. And it would be upsetting to know that one day I'm going to have to like watch him die. And I'm not going to age at all, which is going to be a weird partnership as well. Like, how do you get in a relationship with somebody? It's like the vampire thing where they just age and you have to watch them age. But that's not happening to you. That would suck. But I have to assume living for thousands of years, I'm going to get over it. And that may sound cold-blooded because it is. But if there's one thing that's going to happen living that long, it's getting used to people dying. So it would be the sort of thing where I'd be like, okay, from where I'm sitting now, this sounds really traumatic and horrifying. But I bet looking back when I'm in midlife, it's going to be nothing. And I don't know if that's helpful for a lot of people, but for me, reframing something I'm going through that feels awful as, what is this going to look like to me in 3 years even? That can be so helpful to sort of put things in perspective. I was doing that back in high school where I would like have a really bad score on a test. And I think that was when it started with somebody said to me, a year from now, you aren't even going to remember this day that you're crying over this test. And all of a sudden it was like they cracked a code where I was like, oh, you're probably right. I probably won't even remember this. And like I said, it might seem cold-blooded. It's not like I don't love Owen, but it's also like I don't have control over this. I can't stop myself from aging. I'm not choosing to be immortal over having a normal life with him. This is what I am and I can't control it. So I better just roll with that, So anyway, yeah, the sisters all just are essentially like, all right, well, we're going to go and fucking talk to mom and dad about this. And there's a bit of Jordan that's sort of jealous over the fact that they're going to spend time with family around the dinner table. And she's still here on this like mission. And then she goes and has the whole fight with Brian. And then we have her in the morning and he has taken off and she's down in like the main room looking at like all of this data on the screen. Perhaps awakening Brian was the answer to their happiness, but somehow Jordan doubted that. She wondered if she enjoyed having all of the physical power in the marriage. Was she like that? Shallow? Bitchy? No immediate answer came to her, and Jordan sighed heavily in a futile effort to release some tension. I don't personally think that enjoying having the physical power means that you're shallow or bitchy. That feels a little bit ungenerous, I just think that like admitting that you like something especially when you're a woman and so many women are at the disadvantage in that area, being like a little bit smug about the fact that you're not in that situation, personally, that feels like a really rational thing to me. You know, being like, oh, well, I know that he's never going to try and abuse me because God help him. You know, it's not even something that you're necessarily worried about with the person, but just knowing that's not possible. That's really reassuring. And I don't think it's bitchy or shallow. I think it's just, you know, if you are somebody who's a bit of a control freak, which she clearly is, having actual physical control and enjoying that makes sense. But you have to learn how to, like, reconcile that. That's the part that makes you bitchy or selfish or shallow, is not the enjoyment of a thing, but how you address that you have that enjoyment and interrogating that. So this is when Jason comes in, and she straight up just doesn't make eye contact with him at all because she knows that she does not need that distraction on top of everything right now. With her and Brian being in such a bad place, that's just tinder, and she does not need the spark blowing it up. And she's looking at Imagines. I don't know. I want to say Imogen, even though I'm sure it's called Imagine, because I feel like it, like my mental image of the word is just the normal spelling if I say imagine. But everybody comes in and they start talking about Spears and his involvement, and if they're going to be able to infiltrate his place and get some information out of there. And they're going to do straight up illegal shit. And this is something that I think Raptor says just like very casually, that's illegal. And they're like, yeah, here it is. So we're still going to work the Spears angle? Yes. She didn't dare tell them Brian had mentioned being awakened. They would immediately question her judgment, and she couldn't afford that right now. Her instincts told her that Spears was involved, not simply because of his push to get the awakening process, but because of what Dr. Lindon had told her before she returned to England. I should have told Brian. Bitch, yes, you should. Literally, why? Like, come on. And then she says she was far more used to dealing with daunting news than Brian was. He had been right. He wasn't part of her world. Not the world she really lived in. Not the world that filled her blood with excitement and the heady allure of adrenaline. Yeah, girl, look. You know, just... she's like eventually kind of coming to a conclusion, but I'm not even sure she's willing to admit this to herself. I don't know. She's like, she's admitting it, but there feels like there's these caveats that she keeps pretending are there. And I'm like, I'm not sure they are though, sweetie. So she just tells Lindon it's time. And Dr. Lindon clearly had not been expecting that shit just now. But he says, yeah, I guess it is. So I go back and forth on this because making this sort of speech is a tough thing to write. But there are parts of it that I like the way he handles it. And I like the description of his like posture changing and overall the presence that he holds in the room being really, really different when he starts this off. And various moments in the story cause him to revert back into the same like stance that is familiar to all of them. And so you can see the moments where he feels powerful and threatening and is remembering the authority that he wielded and the attitude that he used to hold. And it's a very immediate memory for him. But the first line of his speech, for me, I was just like, that is so not the way to start this conversation. He gets up in front of everybody and says, the world is really full of angels and demons, old gods and ancient terrors. Sir, that's not it. That ain't it, Chief. I really, like, it just feels so melodramatic. There's nothing to back it up either. Like, at one point, Jill asks him to reveal his true face to her. And I was so startled at the fact that he won't do that. And I'm sure he assumes that his look is going to be so jarring that it is going to put a distance between him and everyone else, because he is going to seem suddenly truly alien in a way that he hasn't so far, and he doesn't want to sacrifice that like relationship he's got. But I wanted him to do something to back his words up. And I think that it's supposed to be that his like posture and intonation changes are part of the evidence, part of what is supposed to like give credence to his words. And for me, it would just not be enough. He just tells them this story that without any context is wild. And he doesn't say anything about like any people who are awakened being in Karna. And I feel like if you're going to leave that out, it doesn't seem like there's not like a connection being made to the issue at hand. And I mean, there obviously is with the fact that he is Genagir and so is Spears. So he's talking about the kind of threat that Spears is, but it doesn't like we have to talk about what Spears is after in practical terms. And he doesn't really like hint at the fact that Spears is after, like, he says that the awakened people, like that humans are incarna that are like baby form, and that awakened people are, they are further along in that like evolutionary process. But that is a very different thing from like, well, you know, we just like the gene pool was seeded within Karna, who have managed to speed up the evolutionary process. Like he makes it sort of sound like it's like a circumstantial thing, where it's because they are direct descendants of full blood incarnas and partial blood incarnas. So it's a really, really specific thing that's happening with Jordan and her family. And if they're not going to include that in this story, it feels weirdly like they're not sharing all the information that they could and should, in my opinion. I understand the like desire for privacy, but there comes a point where like that's just not the priority anymore, guys. So, Heather says, I could have sworn he revealed his appearance to them. Does not do that. No. Jill asks more than once, and I think Jordan is the one that basically is like, Jill, you need to fucking stop, because she's clearly making him uncomfortable. And she's just joking around and doesn't really see the big deal. But, I mean, I'm sure you don't see the big deal because you don't know what he looks like. So maybe consider what it would be like to share something like that, you know? But yeah, this speech, it's like there are moments where I feel like he's getting at something and it works. And then there are times where it's so melodramatic that I couldn't really see anybody presenting the story in these words. It just felt false to me. We gave you war. We brought death, destruction, dictatorship, slavery, and subservience. The Incarnate taught you to stand. We taught you to kneel. I like the line, but I don't buy it coming from him. And I don't buy it in this context. It doesn't, if it were coming from a villain, if it were coming from Spears, I would see it. And maybe it's supposed to be, that's like the point, is that we're seeing a side of him that we haven't really. We've seen his gentle, sweet side that's here to help. And we haven't seen the part of him that was originally what landed. You know, the part of him that was trained to be bloodthirsty and cold-hearted. But it's just like it kept sort of feeling so out of nowhere because he starts at 100 with the like ancient demons and gods. Work your way up to that, dude. Like, you know, there's just a way of sort of being like, all right, guys, I know this is going to seem kind of absurd, but we live in a world where you guys are all accepting that superheroes are real. So I'm going to need you to keep minds open and not instinctively be like, this is bullshit, because if you're going to accept superheroes are real, then this isn't really that big a step. But it doesn't feel like he has to do that much convincing, and it doesn't feel like... It feels like a grandstanding moment instead of I'm sharing some critical information with you kind of moment. So it just, I don't know, it just did not work for me. And eventually Ryan says, so what you're saying is that you're really the same sort of monster that Quaid is, probably worse. And he's just like, yeah, worse. Like, definitely worse. 100% worse. 1,000% worse. And then Jason says, so why are we still here? Why would you leave us alive if we were such a threat? And he says, and this is again, with it feeling like, this doesn't feel like Lindon to me. He replies to Jason, Jason, ever the strategist, ever the warrior. You would have done well among my people. You would have been a good first cast, I think. Jason's question is not that deep. You're acting like human beings are a threat. And he's asking, well, then why are we still here? Talking about what an amazing strategist he is based on this question. I'm just like, that's just a logical next question to ask. I don't feel like that deserves accolades in any way. It's just a way to like shoehorn in a line about the caste system and the way that he sees people that feels contrived. And, you know, this is like punctuated by him having these like really strong emotional reactions, and he like chugs this bottle of water and then he starts crushing the water in his hand. And like, so those moments do work. Him having to tell everybody about this thing that he's been sitting on this secret for like thousands of years. Yeah, this would be a big deal for him. And I completely buy that this is stressful and a little frightening for him. And also he's dredging up memories that are probably traumatic, but when it's foiled against the way he's speaking, it doesn't go together for me. It just feels wrong, you know? So yeah, this is when he tells them that Spears is one, and everybody is like, fuck. Oh no. And, Raptor just says, so wait, were you just going to keep being human until you couldn't anymore? And he's like, I mean, kind of, yeah. He just likes being human, and he's trying to like undo some of the damage that they did. And Lindon says, our hands pulled the worst out of your people, and no matter what some of us did, we couldn't change that. Some tried and were beaten as demons or monsters. Others were burned at stakes or drowned. Elgin, though, he knew how to thrive. And so he talks about how Elgin moves his way up and like kept dropping technology into humans' hands and in like, you know, edging up their power of destruction. And Douglas is basically like, why the fuck didn't you do anything? And essentially he's like, dude, you know what the relationship is like between you and your soldier friends. That's what it was like between us. We had the same sort of like training. We're brainwashed to a point to see each other as brothers. I couldn't turn on him like you wouldn't be able to turn on any of the people here either. I guarantee you. I'm not sure I buy that. Like, and I don't mean like buy it in the writing. I mean, I don't know if I buy that if Douglas were to see Jordan becoming a megalomaniac, that Douglas couldn't do anything or couldn't tell because he just cared about Jordan so much. But then there's the fact that Douglas wasn't actively brainwashed and like bred in a certain way. So, you know, that's something that I'm just like, well, all right, I'll take your word for it, but I don't feel like that's necessarily true. And he just starts to like shrivel up as everybody is going, you could have said something at any time. You could have done so much to slow this down or stop it. What the fuck? And he just says, basically, I was afraid. And Ryan starts hugging him because he's like curling into himself. But across the room, a lot of people are having some different reactions. And there are people who are really angry with him, which I think is what I would be doing. I would be really mad. Jordan says, all right, we've got to take a break and we're going to come back to this. And then they start talking about how they're going to attack the compound that is Elgin Spears' place. And a lot of this, because like there's several more pages before I stop at a line that is from Douglas, but the remainder of this section is pretty much them figuring out what his weak spots are and how they're going to approach this. And just for reference, I ended at a spot that's got like the asterisk break, and it says, Douglas smiled confidently. Since when has a Scotsman looked for an easy fight? But yeah, they're talking about the fact that like Elgin isn't going to be using alien technology because that's too obvious and he can't risk that. But he will be using absolutely cutting edge, top of the line human technology. And he has so many layers of defense, and he has such a grid work of measures to sense like signals being sent and body heat and weight being put in different areas. And what they decide they want to do is they want to use rabbits to like set off a bunch of sensors so that the security guards chase their tails for a while. And then once other sensors start going off, there have been so many set off by rabbits that they start ignoring the alarms. And Jill has a really strong reaction to this. And honestly, it was kind of funny because like on the one hand, I really understand. And I was like, sort of like, okay, I appreciate that being referenced, that she doesn't want them to just shoot these rabbits and for them to have like walked into this, putting a bunch of helpless animals into the line of fire. And I get it, but this is a place where I would not really have an issue with it. This man is like going to take over the world. I feel like if you had a conversation with these rabbits and explained to them what the fuck was going on, the rabbits would be like, sign me up. I just don't think the rabbits would be like resentful of being used in this way, you know? But Jill really puts her foot down, and they wind up coming to like this agreement that was sort of weird, where she says, I'm trying to find it, but basically she says, we'll tell animal control where they are. And that way they'll have to trap them instead of killing them. Yeah, here it is. We deploy the rabbits into the perimeter after 1900 and give them time to do their thing. And then we call animal control to let them know the bunnies are there, Jill added. That way we make certain the security guys don't start killing them. Doesn't telling animal control give away everything? I don't understand that method. It feels like, who would have called animal control? Like, is it supposed to be that like all of security is going to assume somebody else made the call to animal control? I just didn't really understand this as a solution to the problem. I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be that animal control like calls the compound and is like, there's been, you know, a bunch of rabbits sighted in your area because some, you know, I don't know, breeding facility like had an escape. I don't know what they're thinking here. But they like come to this agreement. Jill is very happy with it. Her and Electo seem to be sort of connecting. And Heather says having animal control roll up would be an additional distraction, I think was the thought. Yeah, but like it's a distraction, but it also, the whole point is for them to think it's just rabbits and they have just been tripping things off by accident. But if animal control rolls up without being called, that tips their hand that there's somebody out there who has orchestrated it, doesn't it? Is it supposed to be like animal control doesn't just know where bunnies are? Why would they be there unless somebody called? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, it just feels like you're undermining the whole ruse of using animals, which seem like a natural distraction that just occurred because of circumstance, and instead making it clear like there is a person behind this setting this up. I don't know. So Jordan gives everybody orders and sends them all off. And then we have this moment between her and Douglas where Douglas is like, you're doing a good job. And she's like, am I? I don't really know that's true. And he says something that I really appreciated. Yeah, that's how I know you're doing a good job. Every shite military decision or poorly planned op I've seen has been a direct result of the CO's confidence in a flawless plan. There is no such thing. And I appreciated that because that makes a lot of sense. Being unsure, that means that you are going to constantly be on alert looking for problems. And that's the way to be. That's the best way. So I like that because she needed a little bit of a pick-me-up there. Clearly, you know. And as much as I am really side-eyeing her for her attitude in this relationship that she's having, I still do want her to, like, succeed. She's on the side of good, you know. So I'm way over time. I have to wrap up. But thank you very much, Heather, for commissioning this and for hanging out with me and feeding me information. I appreciate it. And thank you all out there if you're listening. I appreciate you. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.